Ever wonder what happens to those final girls? After the cops eliminate them as suspects, after the press releases their brace-faced, pizza-cheeked, bad hair day class photos that inevitably get included on the cover of the true crime book, after the candlelight vigils and the moments of silence, after someone plants the memorial shrub, I know what happens to those girls. After the movie deal gets signed, after the film franchise fails, after you realize that while everyone else was filling out college applications, you were locked in a residential treatment program pretending you weren't scared of the dark, after the talk show circuit, after your third therapist just accepts that he's your Zoloft dispensing machine and you won't be making any breakthroughs on his watch, after you realize that the only interesting thing that'll ever happen to you happened when you were 16, after you stop going outside, after you start browsing locksmiths the way other women browse the windows of Tiffany's, after you've left town because you couldn't deal with the why not you looks from the parents of all your dead friends, after you've lost everything, been through the fire, started knowing your stalkers by their first names, after all that happens, you wind up where I'm going today, in a church basement in Burbank, seated with your back to the wall, trying to hold the pieces of your life together. We're an endangered species, for which I'm grateful. There are only 6 of us still around.
Hello! Welcome to the grand opening of Miss Spooky Pie's Horror Diner, where we serve up piping hot horror right to your table. I'm Spooky Pie, your waitress, your chef, and your new friend, who's going to sit down and talk about horror with you. If this is your first time here, mine too! And if you're watching this from the future, great! It means I didn't burn it down on opening night! So here we're going to talk about all forms of horror media, from books to movies, podcasts, TV shows, video games, you name it. And then just to make it a little more fun, we're going to make something that goes with whatever piece of media we're talking about. Some days we might have to get a little loose with the interpretations, so some dishes might be more of a stretch than others, but my God, we're going to try to tie it all together. Since it's our first night, we're going to start out strong by talking about one of my favorite themes in modern horror, the final girl. Carol Clover originally coined the term in her seminal work, Men, Women, and Chainsaws. She defines the final girl as follows.
She is the one who encounters the mutilated bodies of her friends and perceives the full extent of the preceding horror and of her own peril, who is chased, cornered, wounded, who we seem scream, stagger, fall, rise, and scream again. She is abject terror personified. If her friends knew they are about to die only seconds before the event, the final girl lives with the knowledge for long minutes or hours. She alone looks death in the face, but she alone finds the strength to either stay the killer long enough to be rescued or to kill him herself.
The concept of the final girl isn't a new one, even if it didn't always have a catchy name. For as long as there's been slashers, or even the precursors to the modern slasher like Psycho, there's always been the final girl. But why do I personally care about this trope? Well, when I was younger, horror, specifically slasher movies, wasn't something I was really allowed to see much of. So it wasn't until my very late teens and early 20s that I discovered the genre, and it was oddly cathartic? Not because I took any sort of delight in watching teens and young adults getting offed, which seems to be the draw for a few people, but in my case, it was the final girl. Here was a girl no different than me, and the worst thing that could possibly happen to her has happened. And instead of accepting defeat, instead of lying down and dying, she gets back up and destroys her own personal monster with his own weapon of choice. If you're someone with trauma, this is revolutionary. The idea that you are more than the bad things that happened. You can overcome and be stronger, a fighter, a final girl. Well, I latched onto that like a lifeline, and I've been obsessed ever since. And yes, I am aware, as many have brought up, that there can be the problematic connotation of the final girl and how she relates to purity culture, and the idea that only a girl who is seen as pure and virginal is worthy of surviving, whereas girls who are immoral or sluts have it coming. And I will agree, especially with the terrifying rise of purity culture, if this is the message, it's not a good one. However, this isn't the angle I have latched onto with my love of final girls. And it isn't even true of all modern slashers anymore. Scream jokes that don't have sex or you'll die. But Sidney Prescott gets down with her boyfriend in the last quarter of the movie and is still the final girl. A final girl who is aided by Gale Weathers, a character seen as an abrasive or amoral woman, who, going by normal slasher formula, shouldn't have lived. Cabin in the Woods, a movie known for its loving exploration of standard horror tropes, casts Dana Polk as its final girl, while the movie literally opens on her dancing in her underwear and alludes to her having an affair with her college professor. Grace from Ready or Not has been living in sin with her boyfriend for years before the wedding the movie opens on, and they very obviously were not sleeping in separate beds during this. In even more recent cinema, we've seen the rise of who might be my new favorite final girl, Maxine Minx, who is literally an adult film actress. So purity culture can't have the modern final girl is, I guess, what I'm saying. And we're not going to entertain those kind of ideals over here in this diner anyway. With that long preamble aside, it was pretty obvious to me that my introductory video for this channel should deal with media centered on the final girl, and even better, on the question I'd had since I first became obsessed with them. Okay, but what happens afterwards? We see her escape or deliver the killing blow. Her movie ends, but then what? What do you do after that? What is your life like? How do you even try to be normal? Up until recently, most media has only been concerned with getting the final girl to the ending credits, not how she deals with the trauma in the aftermath. Some more modern media has made an attempt at addressing this. For instance, the most recent Halloween movies that feature an older Laurie Strode and the person she has become in the wake of years of sequels where she is antagonized by Michael Myers. This is what I want to know. After you become the final girl, what do you do in the years that follow? And then I found the Final Girl Support Group, a book literally about what it says on the tin. A bunch of final girls who form a support group to move past the trauma of their own personal monsters. But before we get into that, you look hungry. Let's get something going for you before we sit down and chat about this.
Now, in some cases, finding a dish that ties into our media of choice is going to be challenging at best, but lucky for us, there's actually a scene involving food in the Final Girl support group. At one point in the book, there's a benefit dinner where mushroom rice balls are served. Even luckier for us, an excellent blog called Food and Books already had an idea on how to make this and wrote up a full walkthrough. I'll be working off her instructions here, but I'll also link her blog post with the recipe in the description below for you. Before you start, you'll need mushroom risotto. Arancini is made supposing you have leftover risotto. If you somehow have leftover risotto in your fridge, great. If you don't, either make up your favorite recipe or you can just make instant risotto, which I did in this instance to make my life easier. It's fine, and no one will judge you. But please, learn from my mistakes, and if you're going to be making risotto, do it the night before, or at least a good few hours before you plan to cook your arancini. The first time I tried to make this, I did so with fresh, warm risotto, and it was horrible to work with and kept falling apart. It is worth it to give it time to sit and cool down. Now that you've got that taken care of, here's what you're going to need. Risotto. The recipe calls for 2 cups, but you can just work with however much you have on hand. As you can see, I have a decent amount here. Then you will need 2 cups of flour, 2 eggs, 2 cups of breadcrumbs, and cubed mozzarella cheese. The recipe is vague here, so I just guessed and had mozzarella left over, which is fine. I just ate it like a goblin. With your ingredients assembled, get your hands damp and scoop up some risotto about the size you'd like your ball to be. Mine were roughly the size of my fist. Then begin rolling them into a ball. If the starches aren't taking and your risotto won't form a nice ball, try squeezing it to get some of the moisture out, then it should roll up nicely. Once you've gotten it into a ball, you're going to poke a hole in the center with your finger and shove a mozzarella cube in there. Then you'll smush the risotto back into a ball and set it aside. Keep doing this until you've used up all of your risotto. Once all your balls are formed, take one and roll it in your flour, making sure it's completely coated. Then do the same thing with your eggs, and finally roll it in the breadcrumbs until it is evenly coated and you don't see any white flour bits. Keep doing this until all the balls are breaded. Heads up though, this is a very, very messy process, and if you're someone like me who is easily grossed out by things sticking to your fingers, this will be a trial for you. I know the first time I made these, I had to stop and wash my hands several times because it was so messy, but at some point you just have to lean into it. Once that's all done, you'll want to heat 2 cups of oil in a frying pan over medium-high heat. I'm using grapeseed oil here. The original recipe calls for a mix of grapeseed and olive oil, but I was out of olive oil and just grapeseed did fine. Once the oil is shimmering and making little pops, start putting your balls in the pan. You don't want to do more than 4 at a time since this will lower the oil temperature, and also it just gets harder to monitor in general. Let them fry in the oil for 2 minutes until golden brown and then turn them over to repeat on the other side. In some instances, the size might make it so you have a naked middle part, but you can just tip those over and they fry faster. Usually a minute will do it. Once you've fried up all the balls, set them aside on a plate cover with a paper towel to let them drain. Once they've cooled a bit, go ahead and plate them up. Now while we're letting those cool down a little, let's pop over to my office and talk about this book. As I mentioned earlier, a particular interest of mine in regard to Final Girls is the aftermath. This is the subject that this book explores through the lens of our narrator, Lynette.
intercut the beginning of each chapter with fake media pieces like Reddit threads, press interviews, movie reviews, police transcripts, and recovered emails. In the world of the Final Girl support group, most of our most well-known and popular slashers are based off the lives of real girls. To quote one of the chapter interludes in the book, "These women became famous in the 80s for surviving multiple onslaughts by masked killers, launching film franchises that provided the backdrop for a decade's worth of makeout sessions and slumber parties." The support group itself consists of 6 girls, all the fictional inspirations for existing horror properties that, of course, the names have been changed for. The leader of the group, who put the whole thing together to begin with, is Adrienne, whose franchise is Friday the 13th, in this case called the Summer Slaughter movies. Marilyn, my favorite character, whose franchise is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, called here Panhandle Meat Hook. Julia, very obviously from Scream, now called Stab, which is interesting since the fictional world of the Scream films, the fake franchise based off the Ghostface murders is called Stab, as seen in Scream 2. Danny, who is definitely Halloween with the fictional franchise The Babysitter Murders, which is also clever since that was Halloween's working title. And then there is Heather, our Nightmare on Elm Street with the fake franchise Deadly Dreams. There also used to be another final girl in this group before she went rogue, and this one is a bit less linear. In the world of the novel, her franchise is called Gnome Coming, and as far as I can tell, this is a weird amalgamation of Leprechaun, My Bloody Valentine, and Prom Night, based on the interspersed movie reviews and mentions that start the book chapters. But then, when we actually meet her monster, more on that later, he seems more closely related to something like Leatherface than the antagonist of any of those films, so who knows what's going on there. Last, of course, is our narrator Lynette. And that's where things are a bit interesting. Her in-universe franchise is called Sleigh Bells, which is obviously a stand-in for Silent Night, Deadly Night. Why is that interesting? Well, if you've seen those films, you know that there is no final girl in Silent Night, Deadly Night, and this is intentional. While Lynette is the character that takes her status as a final girl the most seriously, she's also the one member of the group who the legitimacy of her being a final girl is ever questioned at all. Multiple characters throughout the novel insist that Lynette doesn't meet the criteria of being a final girl due to how she survived her monster. But this is an important theme in the book, so hold on to that, we'll come back to it. Because before we can talk about the themes, we have to talk about the plot. So if you don't want to be spoiled, skip to the timestamp below. For the rest of you, let's get into it, because it's a 339-page book, so this is going to take a second. Our story opens on Lynette doing her morning survivalist/doomsdayer routine. It's very much giving Halloween 2018 Laurie Strode, which according to Grady Hendrix is completely intentional. In the background, the TV says that there have been 6 murders at Camp Red Lake, Final Girl support group's in-universe version of Camp Crystal Lake from Friday the 13th. Lynette heads out to the support group meeting with the other surviving Final Girls, led by Dr. Carroll, who will be important later. Adrienne is conspicuously missing, and Danny announces that she's leaving the group. Danny's wife is dying, and she wants to spend her final days with her. This sends Lynette into a panic. She says that they can't break up, claiming the reason is being Heather, who's this world's Nancy Thompson from Nightmare on Elm Street, who has turned to addiction to deal with surviving her monster. This isn't true at all. Everyone says they've only kept the group together as long as they have for Lynette. Heather says, not for the last time, that Lynette isn't a real final girl, which is going to become a theme in this book, and heavily insinuates she's just here because they feel sorry for her. In the midst of everyone squabbling over the band breaking up, Marilyn gets a text. Adrienne has been absent because she's been killed. This sends Lynette into a bigger spiral, since this means that their monsters are back, and everyone splits in the wake of this news. Lynette eventually makes it back to her apartment, after going the extra long way home to make sure that she wasn't followed. On the news, she learns that Adrienne's killer was the nephew of her monster. This harkens back to the inspiration, Friday the 13th, with the son of the killer in Friday 1 being the killer and then the face of the series for every subsequent Friday sequel. This also goes back to one of Friday the 13th's greatest crimes, in my opinion, which is killing off the final girl from the first movie immediately in the second movie. A move I find lame as hell, and comfortingly, Grady Hendrix agrees with me and cites this as an inspiration for the book.
Friday the 13th Part 2, where Alice Hardy, played by Adrienne King, is the final girl from Part 1 and gets knocked off at the beginning, I always thought that was a real crime.
Julia shows up at Lynette's apartment with a reporter in tow, and the two basically trick Lynette into letting them in. It's really not great. Once they're done being dicks, they tell Lynette that someone in the group is writing a book about them and it's been leaked. This is also presumably how Adrienne's killer found her. At the close of this conversation, someone opens fire on Lynette's apartment, and she runs, leaving Julia and the reporter behind to fend for themselves. On the run, Lynette calls the one person she thinks she can trust, Dr. Carroll. It takes some convincing, but Dr. Carroll agrees to put her up for the night. She meets Dr. Carroll's 2 sons, Pax, who is 8, and Sky, who is a full adult. Lynette does some snooping in Dr. Carroll's office, where she finds files on all the girls in the support group, as well as almost final girls, and the newest final girl, Stephanie Pagatti, who will be important later. While at Dr. Carroll's, she learns that Heather's halfway house is burned down and she's missing. Also that Danny supposedly shot a police officer and is now in custody. Lynette is now fully convinced that someone is coming for final girls and that they have all the information on how and where to find them thanks to the book leak. The book, which Lynette was writing. Hey, plot twist. After learning that Sky is talented with computers, Lynette bribes him with $500 to sneak out of the house with her and back to her apartment to find out who has gotten into her computer. As they're leaving Dr. Carroll's, her younger son catches them and extorts Lynette into buying his hand-drawn comic book in return for not snitching on them to his mom. This seems like a random story beat, but I promise it will actually be important later. At the apartment, they find that her CPU has been accessed remotely, which gives an explanation for the book being leaked. We also at this point see it revealed in a flashback that the reporter from earlier, the one she potentially left to die, has been basically blackmailing her into writing the book and splitting the profits with him. He's threatened to reveal that she's been writing romance novels under a pen name, which would ruin her ability to write and make a living. Lynette parts from Sky and is back on the run. She decides to go and find the only final girl who is for sure alive and not behind bars, Marilyn, aka my queen. She basically breaks into Marilyn's huge estate, where she's currently throwing a benefit, which, by the way, is where our recipe comes from, to raise money for the care of retired circus lions. Marilyn's ordeal with her Texas Chainsaw Massacre adjacent monsters has turned her into a vegan committed to animal rights. This part doesn't really have much bearing on the plot, other than I love it and Marilyn's my favorite. Lynette is almost immediately detained by Marilyn's security, and on Marilyn's request put into her guest house until the benefit is over. Surprisingly, Heather is very much alive and already in the guest house. She's also not happy that Lynette is seemingly edging in on the good things she has going here, and is immediately hostile. While they're waiting for Marilyn to finish up, a new segment comes on. A detective, who Lynette apparently has a history with, is saying that there have been new details released about the Silent Night killings, also known as Lynette's real-life horror movie. The detective is Garrett Buchanan. He'll come up again, and he sucks. Marilyn finally shows up, and Lynette catches her up on everything. She also realizes that Danny's wife, Michelle, is the only one who isn't somewhere secure as she's in a hospice. Lynette convinces Marilyn to go with her to check on Michelle, which she agrees to, provided Lynette and her can go their separate ways afterwards. Things escalate really quickly at the hospice. Michelle is not doing well and looks about to go any second. She wants to see Danny before she dies, and barring that, at least see the flowers that Danny planted at their home. This results in a whole elaborate jailbreak scene of them getting Michelle out of the hospice so she can die at home like she wanted. It doesn't work, and they can't get her home in time, but she is at least able to pass outside. After the chaos, Heather claims to call an ambulance to get Michelle, but actually calls Garrett Buchanan, the douche detective from the TV and Lynette's past. Lynette is taken into custody, where the police questioning her accuse her of having slept with her monster. This is supposedly the new fact in her case. This is the same thing that Chrissy, the final girl exiled from the support group, had done. Again, supposedly, letters between her and the killer have surfaced, implying that she had a relationship with him and convinced him to do the killings. The letters are obviously fake, and this is completely bogus, but props. While in solitary confinement, we finally get a flashback to Lynette's final girl origin and get some insight into why she's not considered to be a real final girl. This is essentially a more humanized retelling of the famous antler kill scene from Silent Night, Deadly Night. On Christmas Eve 1988, Lynette's monster Ricky Walker killed her family and her boyfriend. Much like Denise in Silent Night, Deadly Night, played by Linnea Quigley, who's the inspiration for Lynette's name, Lynette was impaled on the antlers of a mounted buckle. But unlike Denise, Lynette managed to live through it and play possum until the cops came. This is where we learn one of the police on the scene was Garrett, who managed to shoot Ricky Walker dead. Much like the Silent Night, Deadly Night franchise, Ricky's brother Billy went on a rampage 3 years later, going after Lynette and her new foster family. She was again saved by Garrett. Post these two events, Garrett sort of took care of her, and by sort of, I mean he utilized the fact she idolized him and started an affair with her, even though he was 23 years older than her. While he might have initially had good intentions, Garrett capitalized on her tragedy and was the reason the Sleigh Bells movies got made. He, of course, made sure he had a cut of the profits, and once the royalties he was making off her trauma started to come in, he ghosted her. Like I said earlier, he sucks. Back in the present, we see snippets of the forged letters Lynette supposedly sent. Some of the letters are real, since her and Ricky had been pen pals in 5th grade, but the vast majority are fake. But the cops don't believe her, and this is apparently enough to reopen her case and keep her locked up. Dr. Carroll visits Lynette while she's incarcerated, and Lynette tries to tell her that she is being framed and that someone is targeting final girls. Dr. Carroll knows about the book, since it was forwarded to everyone in the group, and she is having none of it. But something in Dr. Carroll's reaction makes a light bulb go off for Lynette. It could only make sense that Dr. Carroll is behind everything. And Lynette, being the calm and collected individual she is, makes a huge scene about this and is hauled back to her cell, hollering the whole way. Eventually, Garrett has her taken out of the cell. She's told that he's transferring her to a more secure facility where she will eventually stand trial. A few hours into the trip, Garrett pulls over and sets Lynette free. He's apparently known that the letters were fake the entire time, and Lynette explains everything that has happened, including that she suspects Dr. Carroll. He weirdly believes her in a moment of being kind of a decent person that he immediately ruins by agreeing to let her loose only on the condition that he can get on a book deal with her. He also lets her know that Chrissy, the fallen final girl, has been visiting everyone's surviving monsters in prison, and maybe she should start with her for answers. Lynette then clocks him and takes his car. I am very proud. On the way to find Chrissy and Garrett's stolen car, Lynette decides she's going to get Stephanie Fugatti before Dr. Carroll can, assuming that since Dr. Carroll has her file, she must be a target. She uses a cover story about being Dr. Carroll's assistant to get entry to Stephanie's house, which her parents completely buy, but Stephanie immediately recognizes who Lynette is and needs basically no convincing to go with her. Back on the run, Stephanie helps Lynette lure out crazy Chrissy. Chrissy makes a living trading murder memorabilia, so they send an email under a fake name claiming to have a lot of pieces from various monsters and arrange a meeting. They stake out the meeting place, wait for Chrissy to get tired of waiting and leave, and then follow her back to her house. Lynette goes to talk to Chrissy alone, leaving Stephanie in the car thinking this is the safer option for her. Lynette almost immediately encounters Chrissy's monster, who she's currently living with, but Chrissy calls him off. Lynette says she's here to warn Chrissy, but Chrissy isn't surprised and apparently knew Lynette was coming. Much like Heather, Chrissy insinuates Lynette isn't a real final girl. But unlike Heather, she says she will be.
You are always more of an unfinished victim than a real final girl, Chrissy says. But it's a sign that you're here now. I think this is your crisis come at last. Her eyes shine and I realize we're very, very far from civilization. You're so lucky, she breathes. I think you're about to become a real final girl.
Chrissy has been creating a museum dedicated to final girls and their monsters. This is why she's been curating murder memorabilia. She claims to know who's been killing the final girls, but Lynette has to come into the museum to see proof. After subjecting Lynette to her museum with a room dedicated to everyone in the group, she finally gives her the proof. She's been playing a middleman of sorts, shepherding email messages between an anonymous client and Billy Walker in prison. The client, who goes by the screen name Orcamen... How do you say that?
Orcaminus.
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 Okay, I got it.
Orcaminus.
Shush, no, don't start over. The client, who goes by the screen name Orcaminus, has been requesting art commissions from Billy, but Chrissy has noticed that there were numbers in each message and figured out that they've been talking in code. Chrissy tells her that Lynette is Orcaminus' final girl, and that Orcaminus is Dr. Carroll.
You might not be the smartest one of us, but you've always been the most stubborn. You're Orcaminus' final girl. She smiles at me, all smug and secure, and I'm suddenly aware that there are too many woods around this house, and not enough people. Who is he? I ask. Orcaminus at Hotmail. I know you know. Do you know what Orcaminus was? She asks, putting the folder back in her filing cabinet. It was a city in ancient Greece. Once a year, it held a feast of Dionysus where the priest would wield a naked blade and pursue fleeing women into the night. If he caught any of them, he had the right to slay them with impunity. This has been going on for so much longer than you think. I can make you tell me, I say, gesturing with my pistol. I thought it'd be obvious, she says. Orcaminus is Dr. Carroll.
While Lynette has been dealing with Chrissy, Chrissy's monster has found Stephanie. Lynette has to fight off Chrissy and her monster to save Stephanie in a scene that culminates with her crashing her car into the living room, presumably killing both Chrissy and her monster. Lynette and Stephanie then run for it. They decide that with this proof confirming that Dr. Carroll is the monster, that they need to get in touch with the other girls before Dr. Carroll gets to them. Lynette calls Skye, who confirms that Dr. Carroll is taking him, his brother, and the final girls to a remote retreat. Lynette manages to get a hold of Julia, who is not dead, but Julia doesn't believe her, especially when her main information is coming from crazy Chrissy. But she manages to eventually convince her to get the girls and hopefully Dr. Carroll's kids and go somewhere safe. Julia agrees, reluctantly, but doesn't tell Lynette where they're going. While they stop at a motel for a break, Lynette goes to the comic book Dr. Carroll's youngest son had extorted her into buying. See, I said it would be important later. The comic details the incredibly violent exploits of a huge monster named Skyman, with Sky written on his chest. Lynette comes to the horrible realization at this point about who Orcaminus really is. Realizing that Sky is the monster means that they now have to get to the girls before he does. No one will answer their phones, but Stephanie suggests that they go to Danny's. Stephanie is able to find her because of the horse ranch her and Michelle had. When they go to Danny's, she is understandably at her goddamn limit. She's burning all of her and Michelle's belongings like she's on the way out too. She also beats the tar out of Lynette for, well, everything, which is reasonable actually. After they get past that, she lets Lynette explain everything. Danny knows that the girls are at Camp Red Lake. After Adrian's ordeal, she used the money she got from the Summer Slaughter movies to buy Camp Red Lake and turn it into a retreat for women who have been victims of violence. So pretty much all the final girls have spent time there. It takes a lot of work, but Lynette is able to finally convince Danny to come with them to try and save the other girls. But we've got another twist coming here. Once they pull up to Red Lake, Stephanie hits Lynette over the head with a sledgehammer and manages to hit Danny with her own truck. Stephanie has been a part of this the whole time. She then proceeds to villain monologue over Lynette's body, explaining how she and Skye met online and have been planning this whole thing in a really toxic bid for fame, which gives Danny the opportunity to rise up like the badass she is and beat the crap out of Stephanie before escaping into the trees. Lynette plays possum and Stephanie leaves assuming she's dead, but Stephanie didn't count on the metal plate in Lynette's head courtesy of Billy Walker. Lynette wades through the carnage and manages to round up Julia, Heather, Marilyn, and Danny. Once they're in relative safety, she tells them it's been Skye and Stephanie working together the whole time. Lynette decides it's time to stop running and face Skye and Stephanie so that the other girls can get away. It takes a lot, but Lynette manages to take them down with unexpected help from Heather, which makes Crazy Chrissy actually correct about this making Lynette into a final girl, or at least the modern definition of a final girl at last. After this, we actually get a surprisingly happy ending for a book that is so steeped in slasher films. No one ends the story in great condition, but they're alive. We close on the final girls meeting up in a prison visiting room to induct Stephanie into the final girl support group. So that's the final girl support group. And now that we've gotten the plot out of the way, we can discuss it, why I think you should read it, and why this is what I chose to open this thing with. As I sort of mentioned before, I wanted this series to be kicked off by one of my favorite horror tropes, final girls. And this book isn't just about a group of final girls, it's about the trope itself. Let me explain. We have our narrator, Lynette, who seems incredibly passive by comparison to the other members of the group. But this is by design. Lynette's journey through the novel mirrors the evolution of final girls in horror media over the last half a century or so. Our first final girls were not badass action heroes. If we look at what is considered the precursor to the modern slasher film, Psycho, Lila doesn't fight Norman Bates to become the final girl. She runs, she hides, she has to be eventually rescued by her sister's boyfriend. Even Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Sally, while getting one of the most iconic final girl endings, spends the majority of the runtime of the movie fainting, being chased, getting captured a few times, and ultimately being rescued. Her survival is almost a result of luck with a dash of resourcefulness thrown in. Halloween is when we first start to see a turning point with Laurie Strode, who actively fights back and attacks her monster. There's a direct through line from this to more recent final girls like Grace from Ready or Not, who actively takes up defense against her attackers, and Maxine from the X trilogy, who pursues her attackers nearly as viciously as they pursued her. There is no luck in how these girls survive their movies. They fight tooth and nail for it. This trend is directly mirrored in Lynette. When we see her past, mild spoilers here, sorry for those of you who skipped the whole summary section, she survived her monster on pure luck. Lynette did not fight back. She essentially played possum until she could be rescued. She only outlived her attackers because they thought she was already dead. This is the first type of final girl, the damsel like Lila Crane. When we first meet her in the present, she has dedicated herself to keeping herself safe. She has all sorts of routines and rituals tailored to allowing her to escape an attacker should they surface. But when first confronted with a deadly situation, Lynette's instinct is to run. It's self-preservation first and foremost. Flee your attacker long enough to either evade or be rescued. This is the era of Sally Hardesty of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Amy Harper of The Funhouse. Interestingly, both final girls of Tobe Hooper, which is neither here nor there, but is interesting. It is in the last section of the book that we see her evolve into what is considered the modern final girl, literally taking up arms to protect her fellow final girls and facing the monster head-on. Here she is mirroring our most current idea of what a final girl is, hearkening to Sidney Prescott of Scream, Sarah Carter of The Descent, and of course the aforementioned Grace and Maxine, who I'm sorry, I'm just never going to stop talking about. And that's the thing about the Final Girl support group. It's not just clever, it's a love letter to the genre, and Grady Hendrix really did his homework. There's both subtle and unsubtle nods to slasher films. There's even a reference to the infamous Garbage Day scene from Silent Night, Deadly Night 2. But it's tactful. This isn't Ready Player One constantly elbowing you in the side and going, "Did you get that reference? Did you get it?" But Hendrix also recognizes the flaws of the genre. Having the final girls of his book sell their life stories that later become slasher films very much mirrors a trend of commercializing and dramatizing true crime. I mean, how many Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer movies have come out in the last decade? A lot. And this is even self-referential. Scream was inspired by a real-life serial killer, much like Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre before it, which can get into the very sticky area of being about monetizing the pain of the victims. In a 2021 interview, Grady Hendrix had the following to say about this phenomenon.
It does tap into a cruel aspect of humanity, which is our love of rubbernecking at car accidents, the way we turn some crimes into circuses, shining spotlights on the victims and forcing them to dance, turning their perpetrators into celebrities, turning trauma into trivia. That can't be healthy for the people trying to put their lives back together in the wake of actual violence. For every victim like Elizabeth Smart, who turns her celebrity into a way to raise awareness and reach out to other victims, there's someone like Lorena Bobbitt who has had her life destroyed.
And further stated,
we tend to celebrate the perpetrators in our world. We can all name Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, but we can't name one of their victims. We remember school shooters, not the people they shot. We valorize taking lives and fighting, but we ignore the harder and, I think, more heroic work of raising kids, taking care of aging parents, and saving lives. The stuff that requires more patient effort. The stuff that doesn't look good framed against the sunset with strings swelling on the soundtrack. But it's the stuff that holds our world together.
He also recognizes what is honestly a pretty gross inequality in the horror genre, specifically in Western cinema. Up until very recently, nearly every final girl or horror protagonist in general has been white, cisgendered, able-bodied, and heterosexual. We've only somewhat recently seen any sort of shake-up to this, with films like the Fear Street trilogy giving us queer final girls, and The Invitation giving us a woman of color final girl. But these instances, while more prevalent now, are still very few and far between, which is something he specifically calls out in his book. The original final girls in the book are diverse. Adrienne is black, Marilyn is Latina, Julie is disabled, and Danny is queer. But when their rights are sold to the movie studios, their movie counterpart is always a thin, active, straight white girl.
I like to write about the world I see around me, and that's a world full of people who are different genders, sexual identities, and ethnicities than mine. I also wanted to rectify some horror movie oversights. It's ridiculous to me that there's never been a black final girl, so I decided there had been. She'd just been whitewashed in the movies. I thought it was pretty likely that some final girl had gotten a spinal injury and had to use a wheelchair. I figured that if someone had been using my dreams to try and murder me, I'd be self-medicating with booze and pills too. And I think getting chased by a family of redneck cannibals in Texas gets a lot more interesting if the woman they're trying to catch, kill, and eat is Latinx.
This was my first novel by Grady Hendrix, but I've been slowly devouring his work since then because he understands one of the most important tenets of horror. It doesn't work if it's always serious as a heart attack. We need levity, which is not to say his novels are slapstick. Final Girl Support Group certainly isn't. But it isn't a funeral dirge from start to finish either, and I think that's so important in horror, because the fact of the matter is, without the moments to laugh, you get tired and decidedly unscared. I recently saw the film Wolfman, which I don't really want to review, but I will if you guys really want me to. And that movie was straight-faced doom from the jump, and I got bored, actually. No one wants boring horror. If your audience is bored, you failed, and you should be sad, Wolfman, if that really even is your name. But anyway, this might really be the end of the review here, which is okay, because I don't know about you, but I'm starving, so let's go grab some food. Okay, this is amazing. But what did you guys think? Have you tried making this? What are your thoughts about the subject matter? Drop your thoughts on the book, the food, and who your favorite final girl is in the comments below. Recipes and citations are all listed in the description. And hey, if you enjoyed your stay here, maybe you think about liking and subscribing to see what we cook up next. This has been the Final Girl Support Group. I've been Spooky Pie, and you have been amazing. Y'all come back now, you hear? I didn't even check the audio input. Hold on. Sorry I stole your chair. Try this again, but this time good. Stop, teleprompter, stop! For the love of God, and all that is holy. Please don't weep while Mommy's trying to record. Don't. Please. Don't. Don't drink my water. Excellent! Hi! Okay. She just wants to go have a bagel. That's all she wants. Hopefully that was good. It's gonna have to be.